All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here. My name is Juliana Di Lauro. I am the state director for PODER LATINX. And we are being joined today by Equal Ground and Black Voters Matter to have a conversation about voting rights and bills that were recently passed or almost passed in the Florida state legislature. We are also here to honor John Lewis, the esteemed congressman and civil rights leader. He has been described as one of the most courageous people to come out of the civil rights movement. And I think that we would all agree that that is very accurate. John Lewis was extraordinary, incredibly inspirational. He, dedicated his entire life to protecting human rights, securing personal dignity, and building what he called beloved community. And I just love that term. If you're watching us right now, you are part of our beloved community. So thank you for being a part of this community. Thank you for being here. If you're watching this, please like, share, comment. We want to hear from you. We want to engage with you. And we want to make sure that the folks that are the most interested in hearing this information have a chance to hear it. So if you're watching it, most likely people in your beloved community are also going to be interested. And speaking of beloved community, I am so honored and excited to have the opportunity to moderate this conversation and to speak with our incredible panelists who are leaders in their communities, who serve their communities in their personal capacities and through the work of their nonprofits. So I want to give a quick shout out to the panelists. We have Kristen Fulwiley, who is the managing director of Equal Ground Education Fund. We also have Genesis Robinson, who is also with Equal Ground. He is the Volusia County coordinator, and as well as Jamil Davis, who is the interim Florida State coordinator for Black Voters Matter. Thank you all so much for joining us, for sharing yourselves, your stories, your work, and your experience fighting the good fight and, getting into what John Lewis famously said was good trouble. So before we get into the meat and potato of the conversation, I just want to give you all an opportunity to introduce yourselves, tell us about your organization and how John Lewis has impacted you personally, and or the work of your organization. So ladies first, Kristen, the floor is all yours.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I'm so excited to be here. So thank you so much for inviting Equal Ground. Again, my name is Kristen Fawali Thomas. I am the managing director for Equal Ground Education and Equal Ground Action Fund. We are a political nonprofit working to engage and empower Black voters along the Afro Corridor. So we do work in Volusia, Seminole, Orange, and Pinellas County, as well as we have a statewide faith-based network that we do work in as well. So our work really centers around voter education, voter empowerment, voter engagement, leadership development here in the state. We started in 2019, but we have been working like we have been around for a very long time. And so last year we were able to really engage in and turn out Black voters across the state through Soul to the Polls events, through voter education. We have made a voter contact, over 500,000 voter contacts between calls and doors and text messages and things like that. So we're just very intentional about making sure that the Black community is engaged and involved in this political process. I would like to say, just for John Lewis, there's just so much that you can say about this extraordinary man. Um, but one thing I'll personally say is that I can definitely see myself in him, and he has impacted me personally because with all of the issues that face our Black community, really then and then what faces the Black America now, he was just very effective in navigating between the militant approach, which really craved transformational political change through radical strategies, with um, with more of our folks that wanted more of a peaceful, strategic way of effecting change. And in my opinion, I think both strategies are needed in this movement. And so I really admired a lot about how he was able just to navigate between both worlds and saw the value in all of the strategies to getting the work done. Another thing that I would just say is that he has been consistent through the very young age when he first got involved in civil rights, all the way up until he passed away most recently. His work and his messaging and his dedication to empowering and motivating Black people for our progression has been consistent throughout his entire life. And that is something that is extremely admirable about him. And so I would say just because of that, sometimes we get tired in this work, but knowing that he was consistent motivates me to be consistent in this space. So
Yeah, absolutely. I love how you mentioned having to navigate those two viewpoints, right? Because on the one hand, we need more militant, radical action, right, to push. And then, but we also need to build bridges and be strategic. And he really did exemplify that. So thank you for sharing. Next, let's pass it over to Genesis. I know you're also with Equal Ground, but tell us a little bit about yourself and how John Lewis has impacted you and your work.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here with you all today. My name is Genesis Robinson. I am the Volusia County Regional Coordinator for Equal Ground Education Fund. We're a nonprofit based in Central Florida with the mission of expanding political power to marginalized communities and building the next generation of Black leadership. And so um, John Lewis was the personification of courage. He was a man who put his life on the line time and time again for the progression of our community, our country, and so we are the better for it. I actually had an opportunity to work in the United States Congress for about 4 years, and during that time, I was fortunate and grateful enough to have met Congressman Lewis and have an audience with him several times. I worked with a more senior member of Congress. So she had served alongside John Lewis for 20 plus years. And so they would have lunch together, they would have dinner. And oftentimes I was, able to get a front seat to all of this. Just one of the most humble people that you would have ever met. Even him being like a history maker and a mover and a shaker, it was sort of surreal to be in the same room with him and he be so normal. It was almost like an out of body experience to see him every day, like just going about his normal routine. But I'm just grateful for the life that he lived. I'm grateful for the sacrifices that he made. Um, Even though he represented district in Georgia. His voice was an advocate for the entire country and an entire nation and a community. And so we're grateful for everything that he was able to do. I owe a great debt of gratitude to him. In every encounter that we had, he always imparted some wisdom. One of his favorite sayings that he used to always say is, "Never grow weary in doing good." Never grow weary in doing good, no matter what we're looking at, no matter the road, no matter the obstacles. We can never grow weary in doing good. We have to continue to fight the good fight, and get in good trouble, as he would always affectionately say. So again, thank you for the opportunity to speak about his life and the work that we're doing here in Florida, and look forward to the conversation.
What an incredible honor and blessing that you got to meet him and work with him and receive like personally those nuggets of wisdom. um, wow, that's extraordinary. um, so next up we have Jamil Davis. Jamil, if you could share a little bit about yourself, your organization, and how John Lewis has personally impacted you and your work.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Jamil Davis. I am the Florida State Coordinator for Black Voters Matter. We operate in 12 states across the country, doing voter engagement, capacity building, and just helping grassroots organizations to build power and influence for Black and Brown people within the states that we organize in. Um, for me, John Lewis was a strong, powerful influence. As a native Atlantan, I um, I just really held on to a lot of the principles and a lot of the work that John Lewis has done. And on a personal level, there is a picture that exists somewhere in my father's house of a 2 year old Jamil being held by John Lewis. And my father reminded me of that in the day that he passed. Because my grandmother was his secretary for when he ran for city council. And so he's just been a really strong influence for our family. He's just been a really strong influence for our country. And I I feel honored and blessed to continue on the work and the legacy that he passed on to so many people within the city that I'm from and just within this country.
Wow, wow, wow. What an incredible anecdote that, baby Jamil, uh, sat on his lap. And I mean, if you find that picture, we would love to see it. We'd love to share it. That's really, really beautiful. Well, thank you for sharing. Let's keep moving into this conversation. As we all know, John Lewis was many things. He was an advocate for civil rights. And we also know that, creating intersectional and intergenerational movements is how we make the most impact. And I wanted to ask you all, what advice would you give us? How should we show up as good allies and co-conspirators for the Black community, especially in this moment where so much is happening and we're finally starting to see some movement, you know, with the atrocities that have been occurring for decades in the Black community? Passing on this question to you first, Genesis.
I think that's a great question. I think, as you indicated, in order to have success in any movement, there has to be intersectionality, right? We have to recognize the power in our movements coming together and forging a collective strength to overcome, whatever it is that we're trying to overcome. And so, we've always heard the cliche saying, there's power in numbers, there's power in diversity, but that's the reality of it. When you're dealing with the legislative side, oftentimes politicians and elected officials, they move when they hear numbers. And so when we're able to build coalitions and build unity amongst different groups, different demographics, it makes us only stronger. And so one of the things that I often remember when dealing with other groups or the organizations is oftentimes we have the same goal in mind, right? Like we all want to go to the same destination, but we have to recognize that sometimes we may want to get there differently, right? Like if we were to leave right now and say, hey, let's meet in California, I'm sure we would all take a different route. But we can't lose sight of the goal of going to California. And it's okay if you take a different road or if I take a different route. The most important thing is that we work together to accomplish the goal. And so I think that's something that we always have to keep at the forefront of our mind is, let's not lose sight of tactics or let's not lose sight of, messaging or ways that we may go about the daily work in our specific organizations. But the main thing is that we're moving the needle and accomplishing our goal that we've set out as an organization or organizations.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. Um, I guess I want to pass it over to Kristen. How do you think we should show up? I want to say that we all owe a tremendous debt to Black people and specifically Black women. Y'all always consistently come through for everybody. But, the reality is that people don't show up for y'all the way that you show up for them. So, curious to hear what you have to say about this. And again,
Mhm.
thank you for being here.
I appreciate that recognition because that is the truth. Um, I think this is a good question, but I really don't think the answer is complicated. Um, it's simply show up, don't take over, just listen. Um, I will also say fight for issues that really impact Black communities. And when you vote, vote with the Black community in mind, because oftentimes people um, feel sorry or feel pain or feel empathy when issues arise within the Black community. But when it's time to vote for elected officials or um, various elected offices, votes are done against the interests of the Black community. And so I would say vote with the Black community in mind, show up and speak up simply when things are just not right. Because it does get tired, or it's tiring having to fight all of these fights, all of these issues that impact our communities by ourselves. And as Genesis, I think he worded it really, really well, is that we can get work done with numbers, but folks just need to show up and show up consistently. So those are my thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for sharing. And then finally, we have Jamil. Jamil, how should we show up as, good allies and co-conspirators for the Black community?
I think Kristen and Genesis covered it really well. I also would like to add to not be afraid to have those um, uncomfortable conversations when it comes to what it is that you should and shouldn't be doing in presenting yourselves as allies within the Black community, um, and present opportunities to amplify Black voices and to amplify strong marginalized Black voices, be it Black femme or Black trans voices. Be in the space to amplify those voices. It's really a privilege to be able to have this particular platform on this morning to amplify such a necessary topic and such a necessary thing that's going on within our communities and present it to other communities within the country. So just be in a space to amplify Black voices, and also just be able to have those uncomfortable conversations when it's necessary, and not take over the conversation, but learn what it is that you need to improve on that was presented within the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking some truths there, having these conversations is so important, and also, a whole other conversation that maybe at one point we can have. But thank you for sharing. Thank y'all for being here and giving us the opportunity to learn from you and your work. And, I wanted to, take a moment to think about how there has been a lot of progress that's been made, since the civil rights movement, but obviously there's still so much progress to be made. Black and brown people are still getting terrorized by the police. Our families are still being jailed, separated, deported, and our voting rights, our ability to participate civically is still very much under attack. The Florida state legislature attempted to pass and did in fact pass a lot of bills that were harmful. When you boil it down, they make it harder for people to register to vote, to actually cast their vote, and to participate in protests and basically have their voices heard. There were a lot of bad bills that were passed, but for the sake of the conversation, we're going to focus on three of those bills. We have the election reform SB 90 bill that just created a whole bunch of hurdles for people to vote. We also have SB 1238, which did not pass from my understanding, and I'm sure that's due to the work that you all did and other nonprofits did to nip this thing in the bud. And this would have increased the percentage necessary to pass constitutional amendments from 60%, which is already over more than half, to 66%. And then finally, HB1, which, you know, it has a long, ridiculous name, but I'm calling it the anti-protest bill because really that's what it's doing. It's making it harder for people to engage in protests. So with that said, you know, if you all could share a little bit about how these bills suppress your community's vote and your community's voices. What are some of the repercussions of the bills? And then, you know, this is kind of a two-parter. What work have you all done around this bill? I know you've done incredible work around this bill. How have you engaged the representatives? What tactics did you use? Tell us about your work. So let's switch up the order a little bit, and I'm going to pass it to Jamil to speak on this.
Well, with SB 90, there's so many restrictions within that bill that has placed us in an area that we now have to be very aware of how we engage with voters, um, from the onset of helping them to prepare vote by mail ballots to even how we engage with them during election day, during early voting, within the lines. You know, we have restrictions to where unless you're the supervisor of elections or a volunteer with the supervisor of elections office, if you're within 150 feet of a voting precinct and you give out food, water, or medicine or provide any type of assistance whatsoever, and you're not one of those entities, you face being arrested and possibly being jailed. We also are looking at having individuals who are requesting vote by mail ballots, having to do it every year, even on times that we don't have elections, and then also having to provide additional information. I mean, thankfully, SB 1238 didn't pass because we're in a place right now where many of our ballot initiatives that would represent our communities and would help our communities would be in even bigger jeopardy of possibly not being passed on election day. And then HB1, the the most egregious out of all three of them, are putting us in a place to where if the language is so broad in that bill that even if we're not involved in a violent or riotous act, but we're simply just at the protest or demonstration or just even event. Because let's be honest and let's be serious about this. This is not going to be used simply just for protests and simply just for political demonstrations. These are going to be used for events that we as Black and Brown people participate in on a consistent basis. And if something violent occurs at these events, we run the risk of the arresting officer using that aggravated rioting charge and us being incarcerated for 15 years. And so the work that we did at Black Voters Matter, we did some very dynamic work. First and foremost, being involved in um, the hearings that happen around HB1 with the committees, whether it be within the House committee or within the Senate committee, and then building a coalition of awesome and incredible organizations around the state to introduce our corporate accountability campaign. It's something that we had already been doing within Georgia and within Texas, and we brought it here within the state of Florida. And it's basically just holding those corporations accountable who have given contributions to these state legislators who supported both HB1 as well as SB 90, supporting taking our voice away, supporting taking our right to be heard, and taking our right for our actions just to be considered lawful within this state. And so those 7 corporations that we immediately targeted through our campaign was Publix, Disney, NBC Universal, who owns Universal Studios down in Orlando, Darden Restaurants, who owns Olive Garden, Longhorn, as well as Cheddar's, um, Office Depot, SeaWorld, and of course, Geo Group. These are corporations that, with research, we have found out that they gave to state legislators across the state who supported both HB1 and SB90. And so we were asking them to please use their corporate influence to help get both of these bills repealed that passed and were signed here in the state, to also call their federal legislators and use their corporate influence to have HR1/S1 and HR4, which are the voting rights bills within the federal legislators, have those passed. And then to also use their corporate influence to divest their contributions from state and federal legislators who support anti-protest and voter suppression legislature across the country. Because with HB1 as an example, we are not the only HB1. We are not the only state in the country who has anti-protest laws. There are 43 states across the country right now that are attempting to pass or have already passed and is already on the books some sort of anti-protest law within this country. And so it is now up to us to hold these corporations accountable, because so many of these corporations, including some that we just listed through our corporate accountability campaign, that last year during the uprising for the movement for Black Lives, around many of the names that we could name who were murdered and killed by policemen and just state sanctioned violence, they made so many statements about Black Lives Mattering to their corporations. They did the Black Square on Blackout Tuesday. And so we just want them to hold themselves accountable to what it is that they stated last year. And if Black lives do indeed really matter to you, prove it by holding these state legislators accountable for their actions.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's so fantastic that you all were there to do that work, because oftentimes, the regular citizen isn't even aware that these things are happening, much less, willing to engage unless they have, groups like y'all who are saying, hey, by the way, these are the folks that are donating to these laws. Uh, we need to hold them accountable. So that's, very integral work that y'all did. So, thank you. I want to pass it over to Kristen to, talk about the same points. How do these bills affect your community? And what work did Equal Ground do to kind of fight back against the bills?
Sure. And Jamil, I echo everything you said. I will say it's so much. I would say that Equal Ground, particularly, we focused on SB90 and HB1 in our efforts during this legislative session. I think it's very interesting that all three of these bills are really a direct hit as a result to Black and Brown communities really showing up. It's funny because we say, Florida had one of the simplest, easiest, well done elections of the last year, of the 2020 election. And we joke here at Equal Ground because we prepped our team. We were ready for a recount. We said, get some rest, but be ready for a call tomorrow morning. And 10 o'clock, elections were over, Florida was called, and we were, just like taking a breather because of all of the hard work that we did throughout the entire election. And so the fact that Black and Brown voters turned out at a higher rate, that Black and Brown voters used drop boxes, the fact that there were protests and demonstrations all last summer as a result across the country of police brutality. And then I would even say the bill that wants to raise the threshold for amendments. I think that is a direct impact of Amendment 4 passing in 2018. And so all of these bills are coming to our communities as a result of seeing Black and Brown communities coming together and really just seeing what our power is. And so that is extremely frustrating because we seem we're getting a little closer, and then you come to, legislative session happens, and it's a priority. These are priority bills, so we know that they were fast tracked through this session. And so I say all of that to say is that it's frustrating, but it's also like, okay, y'all see the power in Black and Brown voters, so we have a lot of work to do, though. I will speak on the fact that, SB 90, as we all know, is just a direct, it just makes voting, it makes it harder for folks to access the ballot. The fact that, there's new ID requirements and Social Security requirements in order to even request a vote by mail ballot. Drop boxes, the availability has been cut in half. Folks have to request vote by mail ballots each year. And then to Jamil's point, people are being felony charges can be given to folks who, even if the officer just thinks that it's aggressive or thinks that a riot is about to break out. And so there's just so much work that has to be done around these bills, and they're extremely harmful to our communities. I will say Equal Ground did a lot of work this election cycle, so I'm gonna save some of the work for Genesis to share. But I will speak specifically prior to election, prior to legislative session, we had launched last year a Take the Lead. It's a Black leadership training. Knowing that there's a huge Black leadership gap here in the state of Florida, Equal Ground really focused our work around combating those issues and really bridging those gaps. And so in February, we hosted a 2-day legislative training for Black leaders in the community across the state that can really learn what is legislative session, how do we get involved, how are bills passed, what does it mean? Because I think you mentioned it earlier, Juliana, is that some folks don't even know what's happening to them. And so oftentimes we hear about what happened in legislative session, don't understand that we have a voice and we have the power to be a part of those conversations really before, during committee meetings, before they even happen to us. And so we really wanted to focus. And then of course, being as though we're still in a pandemic, and so people weren't able to access their elected officials and really lobby on bills that are important to us, it's just a very interesting space that we're in. So we talked about how do we engage our elected officials and really fight for issues that matter to us digitally or in a virtual world. And so we really wanted to train leaders to be able to take action and understand the bill. So we also had state leaders come and talk to us about what are some of the priority bills that impact Black communities, and what are some bills that we should focus on. And so after that, we also engaged all of those leaders who participated in this training. So it wasn't just, here's this information, go engage. We provided weekly updates on priority bills that were important to Equal Ground. We also provided a variety of toolkits. So we made scripts, we made email templates, we did action text messages for folks to be able to say, okay, this bill is important to my community. Here's a template on this is a script that I can use to call my legislators and urge them to vote no on this bill. So we had action items and a variety of things in the toolkit, talking points and social media posts, and just ways that folks can just engage and really just call out their elected officials to be to either vote no or vote yes on a bill, depending on what their priorities and their values are. So Equal Ground was very instrumental in just helping folks just be engaged and take action that might typically not have known to be involved or take action on specific bills. So that is what we focused on, and we're continuing to do this work. But I will leave the rest and pass it over to Genesis to share some of the other work that we participated in.
Yeah, thank you, Kristen. So as Kristen mentioned, Equal Ground has, for an organization that is not that old, has made an incredible impact, I think, in this state. Just, really hitting the ground running and doing everything they can to build coalitions and work with, key stakeholders to really make a difference. And so one of the things that Kristen didn't mention, and I think she may have just left that to me, is not only did we do trainings and things like that, but we also did a press conference in Tallahassee. As the bills were moving through the process, we convened key stakeholders, from all over the state, faith leaders, social and civic organizations, to come to Tallahassee. Jamil actually was one of the speakers to come to Tallahassee and to speak to why SB 90 was such a bad bill and the draconian law and the negative impact that it would have on our community and our state, fortunately that advocacy worked because one of the things that uh, as bad as SB 90 is in its current form, a few months ago it was much worse. And so the fact that we were able to fight back and make and have the legislature make certain concessions is a direct result of us standing together in solidarity and saying that this will not happen on our watch. And it's really quite a shame, that the legislature can basically come back to the center and get away without being called out for how bad SB 90 really was. I mean, they were looking to like completely eliminate drop boxes in a year that it was widely viewed as successful. They the whole not being able to give people food and water. This is Florida. If you know anything about Florida heat, it's almost immoral or unhuman to not be able to give a thirsty person a drink of water, in a lot, and so um, in addition to the press conference, one of the things that we also did, because Kristen talked about COVID and the challenges that presented itself with being able to communicate directly with legislators, is Equal Ground convened a SB 90 town hall. And so what we did there is we were able to hear testimony from impacted communities on how SB 90 would impact their community. And we live streamed that online. We made that available to legislators. We invited legislators to come and hear from their constituents directly on how SB 90 would negatively impact them. And so I think that the advocacy, from Equal Ground, as partners, other organizations throughout the state, I think it truly made a difference because although the bill in its current form is, it was completely unnecessary and not needed, and it does some harm. I think uh, had we not spoke up, had we not advocated, had we not fought, it would have been a much worse situation than we currently have. So I'm grateful for the advocacy of so many folks standing in the gap and, saying that this won't happen on our watch.
Thank you, Genesis, and thank you all of you for the tremendous work that you did. You all said a lot of really important and fire things. I just want to highlight some of those things and bringing up HB1, how that's something that was really drafted as a result, as a direct result to the Black Lives Matter protests across the country. Governor DeSantis drafted this. He saw that over 20 million people around the country were going to protest for this, and he did it as red meat for his base, basically. And it's something that is going to have and is having real life consequences, serious consequences. So at the lowest level, right, we did a press conference on immigration a couple weeks ago. We had a lot of people cancel because they were afraid. They were undocumented. I believe the bill says that if it's 3 or more people that are gathered together, if there's any form of violence, and we all know that we can't control what happens. Things happen, and as you mentioned, Kristen, a cop could say, "I feel threatened," And how many times have police officers said they feel threatened and people lose their lives? You also mentioned Amendment 4, and for the people that are watching us, if y'all don't know what Amendment 4 is, that was gosh, the word is escaping me, constitutional amendment in the Florida Constitution. We wanted to restore voting rights to formerly incarcerated people. People of Florida came out and overwhelmingly supported that, and then the Republican legislature decided to add basically a poll tax, saying that these individuals had to pay back all their fines and fees. When really, when you're incarcerated for years, do you have money to pay for anything? So I think you're absolutely right. I think they're recognizing that we are powerful, that our votes matter, and they're doing everything possible to restrict that power. And they bank on us not knowing. They bank on our communities feeling either like they don't have power or really not knowing what to do. And that is why the work that you all do, is so critical and is so appreciated and important, because people need to know, how can I make a difference? So I think that's a good segue into the next section of the conversation. The legislative session has now passed, right? I think it's SB 90 passed. It's a lot better than it was in the original format, but it still passed. Luckily, SB 1238, the one that increases the threshold for constitutional amendments, did not pass, but HB 1 did. So, I just want to hear from you all. Where do these bills stand now? And like, where do we go from here? What can our communities do to push back?
Yeah, so I'll start since I'm already unmuted. I forgot to mute myself, but uh, unfortunately, HB1 as well as SB 90 passed. And so these bills are going before the governor. In fact, HB1 has already been signed into law. And it was so important to this governor and his party that they made HB1 effective upon the governor's signature. So right now, HB1 is law of the land. And I thought it was quite interesting that it went into effect, merely days before we got the verdict in the George Floyd case. And fortunately, Chauvin was held liable, and the family got justice. But well, the family got accountability, I should say. But it's just terrible that these things are happening in Florida, and like it has been lifted up, this is a direct result of the work that is being done and the power that Black and Brown communities have realized that they have and are exercising in mass. And so, we can still advocate as it relates to SB 90. It's likely that the governor will sign this, as how huge of a priority that it is. But as I always tell people, you have to let your voice be on record, right? You can't, even though the odds are stacked against you, even though it doesn't seem like it's not going to go your way. Going back to John Lewis, as he would always say, never grow weary of doing good. Despite whatever you're looking at, never grow weary. And so I think we have to continue to fight. The governor hasn't signed SB 90 yet. We have to continue to fight. And then even after it goes into law, right, we have to hold elected officials who supported this type of stuff accountable. Make sure that we find individuals who may want to run against those individuals, and vote them out of office because they did not have our best interests at heart when they were in Tallahassee passing these anti voter laws and anti-protest laws. HB1 cuts at the core of what this country professes to stand for, which is freedom of speech, and the ability to come out and express yourself. It just opens up too great of a Pandora's box that I think will have such a disastrous effect on Black and Brown communities. So, we can't give up. We have to continue to fight. We have to continue to find ways to, make a difference and fight back. And I think that most importantly extends to the next election cycle, is where we really have a chance to make a difference. And one thing I like to say to any community or any demographic that's been impacted by this is, we have to keep fighting. We can't let this stop us, right? Like even though this is not ideal, we cannot let them win with these, dirty tricks and tactics. We have to overcome it and continue to push forward.
Yeah, absolutely. There's somebody I used to work with in the movement who used to say, "It's a movement, not a moment," and the work always continues. This is basically a lifelong fight.
I will say that we have a lot of work in educating our communities around uh, what are the laws now moving forward now that these bills are in have been signed. I will say SB 90 was signed early Thursday morning, and so it is signed, it is here, and it is a thing. So Equal Ground will be working this summer, actually doing voting rights tours where we will be educating our communities in all of the counties that we work in to talk about what does SB 90, what does it mean? Who can go drop off your ballot? Um, where are the drop boxes going to be? And just really being prepared. Have you signed up for vote by mail, making sure that you get it done by the deadline in order to receive your ballot in time for the next election? Um, and so we're just going to be doing a lot of education and working with our communities and partnering with other groups across the state to make sure that our communities are just informed and have an understanding of what is happening. I will also say that I had mentioned earlier that part of the work that Equal Ground does is we have a huge faith alliance across the state. And so a lot of the members of our faith alliance, knowing that, legislative session starts earlier next year because it's an even year and an election year. So committee meetings are going to be starting in September. So starting to have those conversations with legislators early around legislation that are going to be important to our communities and start working with legislators early to draft legislation that betters our community, that fights against some of these harmful bills, and then really just getting our communities involved again early, um, to let them know about legislative session, because we know during the summer we'll probably start hearing about all of the next bills that are going to be harmful to our communities, and just getting prepared and ready for that. So as we're educating, I'm sure there's going to be bills that are going to be coming up for next session that we have to be prepared for and start taking action against. And so we just want to be as proactive as possible. But the key is really making sure, especially when it comes to SB 90 and HB1. So if people do want to, come together to protest, because it's our right to protest. And we know that is something that has been effective throughout our entire history, is protesting. And so we should be able to do so. And so, however, knowing though what these laws now mean for our communities, we're putting out like what does this law means and how you can be safe as you go to demonstrate your right to protest. And so it's just a big focus on education and making sure our communities are safe and they're able to cast their ballot safely and correctly.
Yeah, I mean, the education portion is so critical, and I think especially helping people understand how they can keep themselves safe when protesting, because to allow this bill to stop our constitutional right to protest would be really unfortunate, right? Because I think we would, well, I think that Derek Chauvin wouldn't have been convicted if we hadn't protested last summer.
I agree.
That
I
so
agree.
yeah,
And I will just say, it honestly breaks my heart that people that you had mentioned about someone, folks pulling away and not wanting to attend a rally or protest because of fear. And that breaks my heart, because I feel like that is exactly what the intention of this bill was to do, is to put fear. And so my hope and my prayer and my goal is that we can just educate folks on how to do it, understanding what the new laws are, understanding their rights, but it shouldn't stop us from using our voice. So I'm hoping that we can change some things, but we have a lot of work to do.
yeah, Absolutely. Jamil, what's Black Voters Matter doing? Like how can we combat the harmful effects of this bill? What can we do?
So what we're doing is we're having a call with our state. We'll have partners as well as our organizations who partner with Black Voters Matter around both HB1 as well as SB90, letting them know what these bills entail now that they are law, and letting them know their rights in regards to these particular um, laws, what you can and can't do and what we can circumvent around to ensure that we are still able to continue to do this work for our people. I would also like to say that to follow up with what both Kristen and Genesis have said in regards to SB 90. Yes, it indeed was signed early Thursday morning. Um, Governor DeSantis barred all media from the signing of the bill except for Fox News. Fox News was literally the only piece of media um, that was allowed in the premises as he signed SB 90 into law. And so immediately after the bill had been signed into law, Legal Women Voters Florida, Black Voters Matter Fund, Florida Alliance for Retired Americans, and individual voters against all 67 Florida counties came together to file a lawsuit challenging the voter suppression law SB 90. The case claims that SB 90's drop box restrictions, vote by mail, repeat request requirement, volunteer assistance ban, deceptive registered voting, and food and water ban violate both the First and 14th Amendments. So that lawsuit has already been filed, and so legislative action is being taken not only by us as well as Legal Women Voters, but also the NAACP Legal Defense Fund has also filed a lawsuit in opposition to SB 90 as well. And so more info will be coming up shortly on that and what those pieces of legislation means and how they will move within the courts here in the state and possibly on a federal level. So there are things that are being done to ensure that um, these pieces of legislation don't go unchallenged.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really telling that there was only Fox News allowed to witness it. And on top of that, that your own SOEs are joining, your own state offices of elections for the folks watching are, joining in on these suits. It's pretty, pretty ridiculous. And I think if my memory serves me well, there are also some lawsuits around HB1. But I can't remember off the top of my head which groups are involved with that. But at least it's good to see that, we're taking legal action, we're fighting back because a lot of these bills are unconstitutional. I think that leaves us at the end of our discussion. Um, Unless somebody has something they want to say and share, which, the space is open, you're welcome to do that. I'll take a moment just in case.
So one thing that I think is very important for us to remember in all of this conversation is that none of this was necessary. I think that was lifted up earlier, but I think we really have to drive that point home because um, it really gets at the heart of how cruel, these legislators were. They were not going to solve a problem. They basically created a problem with the passage of these laws, both HB1 and SB 90. There's no data, there's no factual information to suggest that we need this. Um, HB1 even went as far as to basically increase the punishment if someone was found guilty of harming or vandalizing a Confederate monument. In black communities, our churches have been vandalized, burnt down, but I've never seen an enhancement on the penalty of burning down a black church. But just because a few Confederate monuments came down, rightfully so, you go and add time for someone who has vandalized a Confederate monument. It's just absolutely ridiculous. And then also when we look to Georgia and we look in Florida, we also see what else we have in common there. In both those states, there will be gubernatorial elections in 2022. And so I find it unique that, both states found it necessary to ram through draconian laws that will have a immediate impact on the voting electorate and make it harder for folks to access the ballot box just before those elections. It's just very strange that that would happen. And so it doesn't take a rocket scientist to connect the dots and see that both the governor of Florida and the governor of Georgia will directly benefit from these laws. And so, um, in closing, what I would say is that we can't stop. I think now is not the time from an organizational level for there to be division. I think we have to find ways to come together, to work together, to support each other, to ensure that we are working towards the same goal, which is to create a more just, fair, and free society that respects the rights of all. And so, um, at Equal Ground, I know that we have tons of programming that is underway, planning, trainings, things like that. And so, join us in that fight and in that work, and so that we can make a difference in our community.
Um, I would certainly echo everything Genesis mentioned. I again will reiterate that none of this stuff that happened this year was necessary, but it happened, and so we just need to continue pressing on and doing the work that we're doing to engage and empower our communities. I will also just say that again, we have an election coming up next year. We have redistricting coming up next year. That is going to be an entire thing. If we look at what happened this legislative session, it's going to be hard to think that it's going to be an easy road drawing fair maps next year for redistricting. And so we have a lot of work to do there, which is engage in our community. So let them know that this is again a thing that is happening to our communities, and we have a right to speak up and to talk about, fair maps and fair districts here. Um, and I will also just say again, education is going to be a key to being involved in what's happening in your community from local to state to congressional levels. Just having an understanding because we definitely have a say so in what happens to us and what legislation is filed. But we definitely need to band together amongst coalitions and amongst groups and we work with Black Voters Matter all the time or PODER LATINX all the time to be sure that our voices are heard. And so coming together is key. And then taking a mental note or just having an understanding who were the who were the legislators who supported these bills that were so harming and damaging to our communities, and knowing that they're up for reelection next year. And so making a mental note, let's vote them out. Let's vote in people who are going to have the best interest for our communities. And we saw an increase in voter turnout last year. So I'm really hoping that we keep that same energy in 2022 and really just work to overcome these hurdles that they work so hard to put on us. And I'm trying to be very optimistic in the work and being optimistic in the fact that we just have the ability to make the change, and if we just come together and just educate and really empower our communities. And that's what we do at Equal Ground. So be sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram. That's Equal Ground Education on Facebook. Instagram is equal.ground, and you can always visit our website to see what we're up to. That's equal-ground.com. Thank you.
Thank you, Kristen. Um, Jamil, any closing remarks, any calls to action you want to share with us?
We are still doing a very dynamic corporate accountability campaign here in the state of Florida. We are still looking to hold these corporations accountable for the responsibilities that they have in looking out for Black and Brown people in this state by holding these state legislators accountable. You can find out more information about that on all of our social media outlets for Black Voters Matter. That's Black Voters MTR on all social media outlets: Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You can also go to Black Voters Matter Fund.org to get more information on those things as well. And just in closing, this isn't something that we haven't seen before. We have seen um, anti voting legislation, voter suppression legislation in other eras before. We have seen anti protest legislation in other eras before, and we as Black and Brown people have circumvented our way around those particular pieces of legislation and still made sure that our people win. Um, this is this is a lot about racism as well as fascism being the law of the land in this state and in this country, but more so, this is about power. And there are people that oppose the freedoms and the liberties that we so richly desire as Black and Brown people in this state, who want to continue to keep their power, and they will go to any measures that they can in order to sustain the false sense of power that they feel that they have. But I and many others around this state will continue to believe that we will win and that we will gain um, power, joy, and victory for our people.
Yes, so perfectly said. And I think they know that if we work together, if we stay in collaboration with each other, have these conversations, continue to uplift each other, support each other, their power will be null and void, and they're afraid. So I just, want to take a moment to thank you all again. Black Voters Matter, Equal Ground, Kristen, Jamil, Genesis, for joining us in this conversation, for all the work that you do for your community. And, let's keep fighting. Let's keep getting into some good trouble, and si se puede.